A military police officer posts Civilian Exclusion Order No. 1, requiring evacuation of Japanese living on Bainbridge Island, Washington. On February 19, 1942, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which forced all Japanese Americans, regardless of loyalty or citizenship, to evacuate the West Coast. A child looks at a soldier as he assembles for evacuation with his family. No comparable order applied to Hawaii, one-third of whose population was Japanese American, or to Americans of German and Italian ancestry. This store, owned by a man of Japanese ancestry, is closed following evacuation orders in Oakland, California, in April of 1942. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the owner had placed the "I am an American" sign in the storefront window. 10 internment camps were established in California, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, and Arkansas, eventually holding 120,000 persons. On a brick wall beside an air raid shelter poster, exclusion orders were posted at First and Front Streets in San Francisco, California, directing the removal of persons of Japanese ancestry from the first part of San Francisco to be affected by the evacuation. The order was issued April 1, 1942, by Lieutenant General J. L. DeWitt and directed evacuation from this section by noon on April 7, 1942. Many were forced to sell their property at a severe loss before departure. First graders at a public school in San Francisco pledge allegiance to the flag before evacuations are ordered. A child looks at a soldier as he assembles for evacuation with his family. Tom C. Clark, coordinator of the Alien Enemy Control Program of the Western Defense Command. Social problems beset the internees. Older Issei immigrants were deprived of their traditional respect when their children, the Nisei, American-born, were alone permitted authority positions within the camps. Japanese Americans in San Francisco line up to register for evacuation and housing. 5,589 Nisei renounced their American citizenship, although a federal judge later ruled that renunciations made behind barbed wire were void. 2 plainclothes men left watch as Japanese aliens are removed from their homes on Terminal Island, a vital naval and shipbuilding center in Los Angeles, California, on February 3, 1942. Some 400 male Japanese aliens, Terminal Island residents, were rounded up early on February 2 by 180 federal, city and county officers. Some 3,600 Japanese Americans entered the armed forces from the camps, as did 22,000 others who lived in Hawaii or outside the relocation zone. Japanese heads of family and persons living alone form a line outside Civil Control Station located in the Japanese American Citizens League Auditorium in San Francisco, California, to appear for processing in response to Civilian Exclusion Order No. 20 on April 25, 1942. The famous all-Japanese 442nd Regimental Combat Team won numerous decorations for its deeds in Italy and Germany. Persons of Japanese ancestry from San Pedro, California, arrive at the Santa Anita Assembly Center in Arcadia, California, in 1942. Evacuees lived at this center at the Santa Anita racetrack before being moved inland to other relocation centers. In January 1944, a Supreme Court ruling halted the detention of U. A crowd of onlookers in Seattle jam an overhead walk to witness the mass evacuation of Japanese from Bainbridge Island, Washington, on March 30, 1942. Somewhat bewildered, but not protesting, some 225 Japanese men, women and children were taken by ferry bus and train to California internment camps. The evacuation was carried out by the U.S. Army. A man in Pasadena packs his car with belongings before heading to the Manzanar War relocation camp. Citizens without cause, and the exclusion order was rescinded, and the Japanese Americans began to leave the camps, most returning home to rebuild their former lives. Soldiers escort an elderly Japanese American couple from their home on Bainbridge Island, Washington. The last camp closed in 1946. Japanese Americans escorted by soldiers cross a bridge as they are evacuated from Bainbridge Island to be taken to a relocation camp. This store, owned by a man of Japanese ancestry, is closed following evacuation orders in Oakland, California, in April of 1942. Japanese Americans assemble in San Francisco for transportation to an assembly center and later to various relocation centers. Photographer Dorothea Lang is visible above the crowd. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the owner had placed the "I am an American" sign in the storefront window. A mother and daughter assemble for relocation at the Los Angeles train station. In 1980, under mounting pressure from the Japanese American Citizens League and redress organizations, President Jimmy Carter opened an investigation to determine whether the decision to put Japanese Americans into internment camps had been justified by the government. The Machida family of Hayward, California, await relocation. He appointed the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, CWRIC, to investigate the camps. A boy sits on his belongings as he awaits relocation from San Francisco. The Commission's report, titled "Personal Justice Denied," found little evidence of Japanese disloyalty at the time and concluded that the incarceration had been the product of racism. Evacuees' baggage is piled up for transport at an assembly center in Salinas, California. It recommended that the government pay reparations to the survivors. Evacuees assemble at the Los Angeles Railroad Station. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed into law the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which apologized for the internment on behalf of the U. Evacuees in Los Angeles watch as trains carry their friends and relatives to Owens Valley. Japanese families waiting to be relocated. Government and authorized a payment of $20,000, equivalent to $41,000 in 2016, to each camp survivor waiting to be relocated. The legislation admitted that government actions were based on race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Japanese American-owned fishing boats sit idle in Los Angeles harbor. The last Japanese American residents of Redondo Beach depart for relocation by truck. A technician bids farewell to his wife as he departs for Manzanar. Government eventually disbursed more than $1. John W. Abbott, left, an investigator for the Tolan Congressional Defense Committee on Migration, speaks to a young celery farmer who has just completed arrangements for leasing his farm during evacuation. $6 billion, equivalent to $3,240 million in 2016, in reparations to 82,219 Japanese Americans who had been interned and their heirs. A Japanese American-owned business in Los Angeles. Of 127,000 Japanese Americans living in the continental United States at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, 112,000 resided on the West Coast. A family awaits a ferry to Seattle and on to a relocation camp. About 80,000 were Nisei, Literal translation, second generation, American-born Japanese with you. San Francisco boys, one of them wearing a Remember Pearl Harbor hat, wave goodbye as they await relocation buses. Japanese children waiting to be relocated. Citizenship, ancestry, third generation. The children of Nisei. Japanese Americans ride on a train to an assembly center. Evacuees wave goodbye to friends and relatives bound for Owens Valley. Citizenship under you. Selling the furniture. The Santa Anita Park racetrack is converted into an internment camp for evacuated Japanese Americans who will occupy the barracks erected in background in Arcadia, California. Photo taken on April 3, 1942. Law. Japanese Americans removed from their Los Angeles homes line up at Manzanar Relocation Center in California on March 23, 1942, for their first meal after arrival at the camp. Rice, beans, prunes, and bread were included in the menu.